Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Michael Boyd. I'm here with Read, Remember, Repeat. And we just want to let you guys know, we could be doing something selfish, things for ourselves, right? But we started a charity, and this is very unselfish on our part, because what we want to do is give back to the kids, the youth, the orphanage, the homeless, the people that don't have those new ideas because they're stuck in a revolving door. So what we want you guys to do is definitely reach out to us. This is the link right here. Help us save a lot.
Collecting my money, be up in his own. With a mission to win it. Opponents kill him, one mission succeed. No lie that I'm on the bottom of the streets. It's smoking in these. Some youngers are beasts. They killing the beast. Hard to compete. Better not sleep. It comes to your piece. Then I repeat. Blowing the money.
Super day, gang. How's everybody feeling? Y'all back at your host with the most, Michael Boyd. We are back with another episode of Read. It's the application that you're reading, remembering, and repeating that's actually going to help you, man. Study the book, right? Not only when we're done with this episode, go back, replay some of these videos, man. Make them a daily thing. Make them a weekly thing. This right here, the Go Giver, I'm gonna have to read this a few more times. I read it twice already. This is my third time reading it with you guys. And look, voila, man, I'm telling you, you'll find something new about yourself every time you read this book, right? So where we left off was page 65, right? The law of influence. And we're closing into the third law, or should I say chapter 9, Susan. So the third law is the law of influence. Pardon me. Let's get going. Let's do what we do. You know what I mean? How would you Pender seemed to ponder the word. What about Nicole? Would you describe her as magnetic? Absolutely. One of the most striking people I've ever met. Pender looked at Joe and said, "Tell me, what is it about her that makes her so?" Joe had to think about that. What was it that made her so striking? I don't know. She's just magnetic. Pender smiled. Like Sam? It was hard to imagine two more different people than the charming young school teacher and the raspy old financier. But yes, they were somehow very much alike. And not just them. Yes, and Ernesto too. And he was going to say, and you too, but stopped short. He stared at Pender. What is it, Don't you? Bing! They had reached the ground floor. The door slid open and Pender gestured with his hand. After you. As they walked through the marble, steel, and glass of the building's majestic foyer, Pender uttered a single word. Giving. Huh? What about giving? That's what they have in common. Giving. He glanced sideways at Joe and smiled. Have you ever wondered what makes people attractive? I mean, genuinely attractive? Magnetic? He pushed on the big glass door, and they walked outdoors into the warm September day. They love to give. That's why they're attractive. Givers attract. They walked silently toward his car. Givers attract, thought Joe. And that's why the law of influence works, because it magnetizes you. The third law, the law of influence, right? Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Number 9, chapter 9, Susan. When Joe returned to his office that afternoon, things were in chaos. Their computer system had gone down for a few minutes, and in the process of getting it back online, 3 days of account records and correspondence had been lost. Everyone was frantically pulling files and restoring information to the system from hard copies. As Joe joined his team and plowed into the growing stack of papers, all thoughts of Sam Rosen, Pender, and the law of influence evaporated. It was nearly 7 when he finally closed his paper-stuffed briefcase, picked it up with a groan, and headed for the elevator. He dropped into the seat of his car, his mind still churning on his work. The next thing he knew, he was pulling into his driveway 25 minutes later. He switched off the engine and sat listening to the clink-clink of the cooling engine. He wished there were an ignition key that would switch off his mind. Was he wasting his time? with these daily lunchtime lessons and laws of stratospheric success he was supposedly learning? Was any of this getting him closer to making that third quarter quota he so badly needed to make? He looked at the front door of his suburban duplex and sighed. Susan would have been home for an hour already. She would be just as exhausted as he was, and her afternoon would have been just as hard as his. He found Susan in the kitchen, pulling something from the oven. She didn't need to tell him that he was late, or that their dinner was a little dried out, or that she was too tired to care one way or the other. Her body language said all that and more. Over a listless dinner, notes were compared and miseries tallied as the two moved through the meal and kitchen cleanup. Joe wanted to tell her all about his appointment at the imposing Liberty office building, but he gave up without even trying. Last Saturday, when Joe had returned home and told her his first impressions of Pender, Susan had been intrigued. But at dinner on Monday, when he tried to tell her about Ernesto, she said only, "So this guy is actually the owner?" She repeated this a few times and couldn't seem to get any deeper into his story. Yesterday, when he started telling her about Nicole Martin's kindergarten conference, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're kidding." It went no further. Joe and Susan had established a sort of unwritten rule. They both had high-stress jobs and would arrive home for the evening in knots, each with at least a solid hour or two of extra office work to do. The unwritten rule was this: we each get up to 30 minutes of complaint time, no more. Tonight, Susan was already well into her half hour. Joe sat on the edge of the bed, doing his best to stay sympathetic, while Susan paced and talked. Family, we're going to go to sauce time, give y'all some sauce, and we'll be right back.
Sometimes you got to go out by yourself, block everybody out, and then go get that bag. Everybody around me pretty much understood because I was pursuing trying to get a bag for a long time. So it became normal to everybody around me. If I disappear because I'm over here studying this and running this bag up over here, people weren't tripping. Sometimes.
And we are back, gang. As I'm sitting here waiting for my pizza outside of Fast Track, I figure I'd get some reading in with y'all. You know what I mean? Let's go. Let's get it. Inwardly, he sighed again, wondering what he could possibly say that would make her feel better. Suddenly, Joe realized that Susan had stopped talking mid-sentence and was looking at him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It's almost 8:30. A tired sigh. "I guess I'm a bottomless pity party." A one attempt at a smile. "I know you've got work to get to." She turned away and said, more to herself than to him, "Fair is fair." Joe opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Fair is fair. What did that remind him of? And why did it sound so wrong? 50-50's a losing proposition. It was Sam, of course, even Steven. "I scratched your back, so now you owe me." That's not being a friend. That's being a creditor. Was that what their marriage had become? Without thinking about what he was going to say, he blurted out, "No, Sus, wait, actually I don't." She turned back and looked at him. "Please, go on," he said. "I'd like to hear about what happened, really." For a moment, Susan looked at Joe as if he had told her that the laws of gravity had just been revoked. "Really? Sure," he said. "I mean, it sounds like it was pretty rough. So what did you do?" His wife sat next to him on the bed and looked at him again. "Really?" He said, "My stuff will wait?" Susan slowly began to talk again about her day, about an especially nasty conflict she was having with a coworker. After a few minutes, she stopped mid-sentence again and looked at Joe. He nodded and waited for her to go on. She lay back against the pillow and began to pour her heart out. She started talking about how long this difficult situation at work had been brewing, why it hurt her, so how lost she was as to what to do about it, how it made her feel. 20 minutes later, she was crying. Joe was mortified. He'd been listening carefully, but she talked about so many different issues and covered so much ground, he wasn't sure exactly which thing she was crying about. It seemed as if For Susan, everything was wrong. He laid down and put his arm around her awkwardly, but her weeping continued. He murmured a few attempts at words of comfort, feeling foolish all the while. What was it Gus had said? Sometimes you feel foolish, even look foolish, but you do the thing anyway. Finally, her sobbing turned to sniffling, and then that stopped too. Joe felt immense relief. Perhaps his words were not so foolish after all. They seemed to have given her some comfort at least. Or perhaps she was just thinking, hey, he said, love you. Susan said nothing. Sus. He stirred her gently. She was asleep. She hadn't heard any of his words of comfort. She just cried herself to sleep, feeling useless and defeated. Joe quietly got himself ready for bed and slipped under the covers, wrapped in a quiet ache for Susan's misery and wishing he could have done something to take away its sting. He eventually drifted off. The next morning he awoke with a start and lurched from deep sleep into sudden, horrified realization. Yesterday's lesson, what was it? Sam Rosen, networking, an army of personal walking ambassadors, the law of influence. He had gone from work to home to bed and passed the night away without even thinking about the day's lesson, let alone trying to apply it. He groaned and grabbed his pillow, meaning to throw it across the room in frustration. But as he did, he realized that Susan was not in the bed next to him. He glanced at the clock, 8:15. He had overslept. Susan must have crept out of bed and left the house without talking to him, without even bothering to wake him. He groaned again. He blows Pinder's lesson. He was late for work and he was on the outs with Susan. 3 strikes, Joe, he muttered. Pinder's words echoed in his mind. If you don't abide by my condition, our meeting will come to an end. He dragged himself upright with sinking thoughts about calling Brenda to cancel his lunch appointment with Pinder. And then he glanced at Susan's pillow and noticed a piece of paper, folded it in half with a single word written on the outside. Sweetheart. When was the last time Susan had called him that? Come to think of it, when was the last time Susan had written him a note? He picked it up and opened it. My sweet Joe, I hope I succeeded in slipping out without waking you. You deserve the extra rest. After the earful I gave you last night, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. Generosity? My sweet Joe. He read the rest of the note. I can't remember ever feeling so listened to, so heard. I love you. Joe was at a loss. Generosity. What had he been generous about? He looked back at the note, scanning it for answers. Thank you for your generosity. I can't even remember ever feeling so listened to. He rubbed his face, amazed. It wasn't about complaining at all. She just wanted him to listen, just wanted to be heard. All at once, he remembered that voice like a creaking gate, hinge. Stop keeping score. And then he laughed. He had done the homework. Page 77, chapter 10, the law of authenticity. I hope y'all are enjoying the story, man. This story gets even more revealed and action-packed, man. It's a beautiful story. I would recommend this to anybody. Read, remember, repeat, man. See y'all another day.
Who you know? Talk that swag shit. Mugga boy, I'm in my bag, bitch. I am way past the average. If you check my GPA, it'll show you I'm a savage.
We keep it jumping, we keep the party jumping. We out here getting money, we ain't worried about nothing. We keep it jumping, we keep the party jumping. We out here getting money, we ain't worried about nothing. We keep it jumping, we keep the party jumping. We keep it jumping, we keep the party jumping. We keep it jumping, we keep the party jumping. We out here getting money, we ain't worried about nothing.